You're listening to The Roofr Report. Tune in for exclusive interviews with roofing experts and insights from leaders who walk the walk. Grow with Roofr, and your host, Pete McKendrick.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Roofr Report podcast. I'm your host, Pete McKendrick, and we've been showcasing some of our users here in 2024. It's kind of a new thing for us to do. We've been focusing on a Roofer of the Month. We just released our March Roofer of the Month last month, Joe Andrews, and now really excited to welcome our April Roofer of the Month, Jason Shumway. So welcome, Jason. Every month we're going to be showcasing a different roofer here and getting to know them and getting to hear their story of how they got into the industry and where things are going for them. So excited to have you on, Jason. I appreciate you joining us.
Thanks, Pete. Appreciate you guys recognizing me and put in a lot of hard work over the years. And the industry is not easy, as we all know. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's we talk about how many of these businesses go out of business. I think it's a 95% attrition rate in the first 2 years. So it's a tough industry to stay in, and I think it's actually gotten tougher. Here in the last couple of years, I think with the injection of some PE money and things like that going on, it's obviously changing the landscape a bit, and I think it's upping the barrier of entry a bit and making it a little bit tougher to survive. So hats off to you guys for what you've been able to accomplish. And, tell us a little bit about Bradford Xteriors and what you guys have going on.
Absolutely. Bradford Xteriors, I started the company. It wasn't an acquisition. I started it as a greenfield back in 2005, 2006. I got out of college in 2003 and was working in the distribution avenue of the industry. And just for a number of years, I saw some very unscrupulous, not so great human beings, in my personal opinion, walking in with just big old wads of cash. And I was thinking to myself, well, I'm an entrepreneur. I've been, running businesses since I was a young kid, and it's, maybe the calling or the opportunity is going to be on the other side of this counter. So at that point in time, I just started to kind of do some soul searching. Went and ran some storms with some other folks, did some sales, got to learn the industry from a lot of different angles. Short amount of time in manufacturing, and then really ended up getting Bradford Xteriors kicked off when Hurricane Ike hit Central Ohio. It hit a lot of the country, but come all the way up and came through Central Ohio. And we hit the ground running. And believe it or not, when Hurricane Ike hit, I was working and running a storm in Minneapolis, Minnesota, for then a buddy of mine. He was getting married and was on a honeymoon and asked me to come and run the storm, almost like it was my own company, because he wasn't going to be around. And that was a pretty massive storm in 2007 in Minneapolis. If a lot of people probably know, that storm was a really doozy. So, but got the call from my then wife. Said, we've got trees falling down everywhere. On the news. I wasn't even really focusing about my own market because I was trying to run that storm. But finished up there in Minnesota and came home and just went gangbusters. Obviously, that was in the start of the economic downturn, or right at the economic downturn. And just couldn't have been a better timing for how that all went down. We just started word of mouth, started pounding on Craigslist and silly old time lead generation services that I no longer use, but really hit the ball out of the park. And it created cash flow for me, which a lot of people use cash flow and roll back into their business. I used cash flow and started buying real estate while the economy was in the tank. So I started buying ranches, for $140,000, which a handful of them I still own. Most of them I've gotten rid of, but a handful of them I still own, and they're worth $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 now at this point. So it's Bradford Xteriors has been the catalyst for a lot of my different investing I've done over the years. But still stayed solid to the roots, of the contracting industry. But at the beginning, you did state something that is 100% true. The landscape of the industry has and is continuing to change very rapidly, very, very rapidly. With the, like you said, kind of infusion of private equity firms and the infusion of storm damage per se. It's a lot different than it was nearly 20 years ago now. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting. Your path in is interesting because you learned kind of every side of the industry before getting into it yourself. I think so many times people get into it and they only understand one side of it. Maybe they came from sales, or maybe they do have a business background. Maybe they were in production. They were actually an installer. So they kind of only see one side of it. So you're a bit unique there in the fact that you were on the supplier side. You said you spent some time with manufacturing. You did some sales. So you kind of had a good feel for the whole aspect of what it took to run the business. So I'm sure that that's definitely helped you having all that insight, as you've got going.
Absolutely. It's they say you are a roofer, or I are one, or I was one, or we're swinging a hammer one day and selling roofs the next. I mean, I totally get the failure rate in the industry, because if you don't have that core business background or that core understanding of business in general, it's harder and harder every single year to put that product out there that's going to be successful. And I think more so anymore these days, with how much insurance work there is out there, and how the insurance companies are stringing out the homeowners, which in turn string out cash flow on the contracting side of things. That's another thing. You have to be fiscally sound, and you have to be fiscally responsible to stay in this game.
Yeah, it's an important fact. I always say there's a big difference between being a roofer and being a roofing business owner, right? It's two very different things. And I think some people take for granted the fact that, hey, I'm a roofer, I understand roofing, I should be able to run a business, but it's not necessarily the case. Like you said, definitely some basic business knowledge is going to be crucial to your success or potentially your failure there. Talk a little bit about your team, Jason. Like, how are you guys made up? How big is your team? How spread out are you guys in the territory that you cover? And
Absolutely.
how much have you guys grown here over the number of years that you've been in business?
So my team is as big as or as small as it needs to be. I have lots of people that I work with on a lot of different bases. More so, my team at Bradford, we've kind of shrunk that back down to being a very small, manageable company. There's been ebbs and flows within my business, and I've always found that 1.8 to 2.2 million dollars is a perfect spot for me, for the level of stress I want, for the level of profitability within just Bradford Exteriors. And again, a lot of people are eggs all in one basket. I tend to not put all my eggs in one basket. Bradford Exteriors is an entity that I own. I've recently purchased a percentage of Rio Blanco Roofing out of San Antonio, Texas, with Chuck Allen. A lot of people know Chuck, and he's a well-respected in the industry. So I am a partial owner of Rio Blanco, and then I also have my hands in a handful of other roofing companies throughout the country. But with Bradford Exteriors, I've kind of gotten back. Your guys' platform has actually allowed me to get back to that 1.8 to 2.2 without a lot of the overhead. As I've told my story to many about the Roofr platform, over the last handful of months, I've sold a roof from the beaches in Honduras, Roatan Island, Honduras, which I love to dive there. I've sold a roof from the beaches in Florida. I've sold a roof from the beaches in North Carolina. I connected to internet while I was flying, and I was selling a couple roofs over the last handful of months. So the you know, COVID was terrible from the standpoint we lost a lot of good people. But at the same time, COVID has allowed our industry to be somewhat remote, and people have realized that we can still get our job done with reliable field service individuals, i.e., crew, sub crews. Um, and then really create a system to where you can do everything remote in this industry, on your easier roofs. Don't get me wrong. I still feel like, on-site visits are definitely necessary. But you have a 412 up and over 17, 18, 19-year-old house. I mean, we can majority of the time assume it's going to be one layer, and I've started to put in my contracts where if there's an extra layer that we didn't catch or was cut back, that there's going to be a cost for it, just like as an incurred cost when you have wood damage.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think that the industry as a whole, is moving more and more towards being able to do things digitally, and I'm seeing more and more roofing owners that are able to run their companies more remotely. Corey Combs of South Shore Roofing is a good friend, and he's, spent some time away from, at another property that he owns, away from his actual day-to-day operation this winter for the first time. And, it's tools like Roofr and things like that are allowing you guys to have that flexibility, and it allows you to do other things, right? And pursue other interests as well, and still be able to remotely run that business. So
I have two daughters, 12 and 14 years old, and they got a lot of demands. My youngest plays travel soccer, and I'm on the road a lot right now. So, the flexibility that this industry creates for me and for my family is a perfect mix. Um, I am an entrepreneur, so I'm always starting. It almost feels like every 7 years I've got a little offshoot of something. So 2010, I opened up Bradford Xteriors of Colorado that I ran for, 10 years. I closed that down right before COVID. But then 7 years after that, I owned and operated and ran a bar for a short amount of time. And here, 7 years
nice.
later, and I have a new venture that I'm going to allow you to tell me when is the right time to bring that out. But I'm super excited about this opportunity for myself and for other small to medium-sized roofers throughout the country, actually.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about that. But before we get into it, let's talk a little bit about the fact that I really like the fact that you were conscious enough to say, because I think everybody gets into this business, right? And you see a lot of opportunity to grow. Once you get yourself established, like, hey, I could very easily be a $10 million company, or I could grow maybe to 20 if I add these people, if I increase this territory size. And the fact that you've consciously made the decision to say, like, hey, I found my sweet spot, right? We're profitable here. I'm making what I want to make out of this. Everybody's happy. We're running smoothly. There isn't really a need to jump up, and I've had some contractors say to me, hey, I'm making, 20, 25, $30 million a year now. And I was way happier as an owner when I was making 12. Right. And so, I think that's really interesting that you were able to recognize that and find that sweet spot. And I guess talk a little bit to that, like, because I do think everybody gets into this and they're just like, hey, let's shoot for the moon, right? Like, we're going to get huge, and, I'm going to make tons of money. And, talk to the fact that you were able to say, hey, like, here's my goal. And the difference, I guess, is revenue versus profitability, right? Like, I can make a ton of revenue and still not be a super profitable company, or I could make less revenue and potentially be right in my sweet spot, right?
Absolutely, and I won't. This won't go without being said that I fell into the trap of growth, 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 growth. Growth did create me an absolute extraordinary net worth, and I was never so damn unsatisfied in my entire life. My bank account grew, and my satisfactory and quality of life, deteriorated every single year. To the point a couple years ago, it created a divorce within my 20-year marriage. So there's things that obviously we live and learn. I even preach this to my children that any situation, good or bad, there's learning and teaching principles that you can pull out of any of it. So um, The sweet spot was not something that I fell into without falling and tripping over myself multiple times.
Yeah, it's a good lesson to learn, though, for sure. Is that, being profitable doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a massive company, and you can definitely be comfortable and like you said, have that better work-life balance potentially at a smaller number, maybe, right? And, and I think that gets overlooked a lot of times as we see the opportunities to grow there. So, and it's allowed you, like you said, you have that entrepreneurial spirit and you want to try some other things. It's allowed you to do that. So talk to us a little bit about what you have going on now. Like you said, you're about to launch a new venture here. So what's up with you, and what do you got going on in 2024?
Yeah, absolutely. Very excited. So, about 2010, I was a minority investor in a small roofing distribution house here in Central Ohio. I was a silent owner, and my partners grew that and did a great job with that. And we were actually acquired in 2022. So I was out, kind of, out of the distribution side of things. And over the last, couple years or even greater, actually, the acquisitions in our industry have been so great, especially when the interest rates were obviously next to nothing. The private capital or the venture capital money was pouring in like no other. And we all know that there's really no mom and pop shops out there to choose from per se. Your lumber yards even were getting bought up, and it's a large conglomerate that owns pretty much a majority of all distribution. So, early to mid last year, I started a peer group. I had 30 small to middle sized contractors and sent out questionnaires. And the biggest thing with not all of them, obviously, because quite a few of them have great reps with, my soon to be competitors. And I won't say anything bad. We need, you need those large national companies, to be able to make this business work. So it's, my venture that hopefully is going to be launched here within the next 45 to 60 days is actually called Bradford Roofing Supply. There's quite a few people in the industry that I've known for the last 20 years that are taking a leap of faith. One of the things obviously in our industry, we know that can shoot your reputation and shoot everything that you have is not paying your bills, creating, a riff in between, people that were with you or weren't. I've tried for the most part to not burn any bridges, and especially in the sense of paying my bills. I've always been pay them on time, get that early discount, and I think that goes without showing. Now that I'm going to open this distribution wing, there's quite a few folks that are taking me on, taking a leap of faith, and knowing that I am a startup, but at the same point in time, I have capital behind me, my own, that is going to pay the bills, no matter if things are great or if things aren't so great. So.
Yeah, it's interesting, like when we had the conversation for March with Joe Andrews, he was talking about his customer base and how, customers used to really be more of a close-knit community, and they talk to each other more, and you got more referrals out of that, idea. And then, we kind of went our separate ways, and you didn't really know your neighbors much. And now we're kind of coming back a bit, even though it is maybe in a virtual sense, with like the Nextdoor app. And, like I know here we have a community group where I live that everybody in the town is on. And, so it's interesting that, kind of along those same lines here, are we seeing maybe a turn to where, we used to be predominantly those mom and pop, type of smaller suppliers. And then obviously we've, consolidated and got bought up by some of these larger organizations. And now are we potentially seeing a turn to where we go back to the more mom and pop personal relationships? Because, I mean, let's state the facts. I mean, honestly, I think the biggest deciding factor for a contractor in what supplier to use is that rep relationship, right? If they love their rep, there's no getting them to change to another supplier. It doesn't matter how good the price is. If their rep is taking care of them, So that personal relationship is a huge piece of it. And I wonder if that will drive, organizations like what you're putting together here to really kind of come back around and be prevalent again, because people do rely so heavily on that person and that personal relationship.
Yeah. And let me be clear, the business model is much different than the national suppliers as well. I'm going to have two different wings of this business. One is going to actually be a drop ship wing, and then the other one will be the daily operations servicing the local contractors. And I'm really trying to grow with my reputation that I have in the industry throughout the country, try to grow the wing of dropship, and I'm hoping that creates enough day-to-day cash flow to be able to pay the bills, and then I can pick and choose and build the local clientele as it comes along. Because as I always say in the contracting side of things, just because they have a checkbook or they have money in their checking account doesn't necessarily mean that's a good fit for me or my organization.
Yeah.
So it's, some people probably would think that that's me kind of maybe pounding my chest saying I don't have to take on that business, but it's again, it's that relationship business. It's that knowing what direction you want to go in, and finding what that dollar figure is that you want to hit annually, and being able to work backwards from that. I think too many people in our industry, in both sides, the well, probably all three sides, manufacturing, distribution, and the contracting side of things, want to work from the bottom up instead of find out where your goals are and work backwards on those goals to be able to hit your targets and kind of be able to work your KPIs that way.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting statement, because I do think traditionally we kind of look at it backwards, right? And I think that, that's an important lesson for roofers to learn, is that, you really got to kind of work, like you said, you're working the complete opposite of what you think you should, to get to those goals, and to figure out what you got to do, what action items you need to get to those numbers. So,
I've been asked
great,
backwards my
great
entire
advice.
life.
There you go. Maybe that's
You
why
know,
it
I,
comes
I
easy, right?
I started as a kid, wheeling out candy bars. I was buying pallets of candy bars as a kid, and everybody thought they were for some, charitable organization or something. I didn't lie to them. I just told them I was selling candy bars, but little did they know I was, getting 50% in my pocket every time I sold a candy bar for $1. So,
Nice. Very cool. Well, nice. What are some of the biggest changes that you've seen since when you started Bradford Exteriors until now in the industry? Like, obviously, we talked a little bit about the PE, injection into the industry, but what other things have you seen change? And what would you suggest if I was a contractor starting now, some of the things that I would want to look for?
I think the greatest change in our industry is youth. When I started in the industry in the early 2000s, um, and I dabbled in things while I was in college in the 90s, and it was the good old boy network. The contractors or the business owners, there was obviously way fewer than what we have today, and they were growing. They were in their 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. It's not unheard of to hear a 18, 20, 21, 25-year old business owner in our industry now that's absolutely, kicking butt and taking names. And I'm proud of that. I'm happy for them because obviously the barriers have come down. Minority and the women-owned businesses within the roofing and construction industry are beginning to increase, and that really excites me as a girl dad. My daughters, I said earlier, are 12 and 14 years old, and I started liking, and I'm not a huge fan of social media, but it is what it is. But I've started to like a lot of the pages of the women roofers, and I give a shout out right now to each and every one of them. Great job, and I'm in 100% support and growth of each one of their businesses.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like I do think that's an interesting insight. That I definitely have seen, just in my time, I've been in the industry now 6 years, first with the CRM and now with Roofr. And just the contractors that I talked to early on, like you said, it was just even 6 years ago, you didn't have a lot of younger contractors in the mix. You had a lot of guys that had been in business for a long time, had done things the same way for 20, 25 years. And, they weren't really apt to change what they were doing. They were comfortable with what they were doing. They knew they were making money. And then you do have, like recently, especially, you really have this injection of youth, and it's changing the industry because, they are obviously they grew up with this in their hand, and they are more tech
Yeah,
savvy, and they see
absolutely.
the advantages of it, and understand, the customer base maybe even a little bit better because they are one of them, and what it takes to get access to the customer, and meeting the customer on their level with social media and the type of advertising that they're doing. So yeah, it's an interesting adjustment to the industry. I met a guy at RoofCon. I think he was 23 and he was $10 million in revenue already. So and he was only in business a couple of years, but just really smart about what he was doing and how he attacked it. And like you said, a little bit business savvy, and he had just done a really, really good job. So yeah, that's
I
definitely an interesting take for sure.
Yeah, I get calls all the time. I mean, and I think maybe a little new pitch out of some of these young marketing ladies and fellas are. I'm from the Ohio State University, and I'm doing a case study. I'm working to try to get clients for your roofing company. So, like, there's 18 to 22-year-old kids that are sitting in their dorm room that are either dialing for dollars, or they're putting marketing pieces together for professional roofers like myself, and starting legitimate marketing firms right from their dorm room. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's, whatever. Facebook started from a dorm room. There's a lot of good coming out of the greater education, but at the same point in time, I think one of the things that I see as a negative to all this is it's easy. It's easy money. Like you can sit on your phone and you can do it. So the days of really having to grind and come to tough times and to get into the trades like the plumbing and electrical, and like our trades are dying because there is trades that are much easier and much more affluent per se. I'm not so excited about the direction of the industry per se as a whole. I think it's allowed some very large, unscrupulous folk to get in and take advantage of the elderly, take advantage of business owners and building owners, and I shouldn't say as a whole, but you're going to have that at any time. But I think more than any time I've ever seen in the industry, we're starting to see a lot of those sad stories come out. And I just want to rally as an industry to squash that, because really it's only a couple percent of the industry that gives us all a black eye.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's one bad experience with a contractor, regardless of what it is, doesn't even have to be a roofing contractor. It just gives contracting in general a black eye, and a bad name. So, yeah, it's a good point though. I think that definitely, like you said, you've got these kids now more tech savvy, potentially marketing to you guys instead of actually getting out there and learning a trade and starting a business. So it's it could create a void. Definitely could create a time where we see a downturn in new businesses coming into the industry because of the fact that they just aren't interested in the trades, right? Like they think there's money to be made easier ways than just getting out there and grinding and running a roofing business. So yeah, it's an interesting
Absolutely.
point for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, with my real estate portfolio, I have to use a lot of plumbers and electricians and HVACs and companies. I tell you what, the rates, obviously inflation is through the moon right now, but the rates that the trades can charge right now on an hourly basis is it great for them, good for them. They're meeting a need and they're meeting a void right now. But if we don't have, some of our youth that start kind of getting back into the trades, or having the trade schools start to fill their classrooms, there is going to be a tremendous void.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting. So what is on the agenda for, obviously you got the roofing supply company coming online here and getting going. What does the future look like for Bradford Exteriors as a roofing company?
Absolutely. So in everything I do, it's always working to the goal of 50 years old for me. I've always said I was going to be 100% retired and relaxing at 50 years old. And I'm on path. I'm on track for that. I'm 43, going to be 44. So I have 6.5, 7 years right now to build some things and create a legacy that potentially would get passed down either to my daughters or get sold if they don't want to step up and run my companies. Um, but with that being said, I am going to stay right in my wheelhouse, Pete. 1.8 to 2.2 million dollars is exactly where I want to be. I shoot for it. I work backwards from it every single year. Don't get me wrong. We have years where we hit five because we have a $2 million project that comes in. So those are loose, but those are always goals. And I know at those revenues, I can pay my bills. I can live handsomely and stay within my means. What I look at right now, this weather is so darn unpredictable. Last night Kansas City got smacked with some big hail. You've got it working all the way through the Midwest today, and Central Ohio hasn't been hit since with anything seriously large since 2003. 2011 was over in the Dayton market, which is almost a couple hours away, but seems like the last 4 or 5 years, storms have picked up and let up, and just last month we got smacked with 5 tornadoes, and they did a tremendous amount of damage here in Central Ohio. And these weather patterns, I'm not gonna get on weather or climate change or anything like that, but there's something to be said for the severity of
Yeah.
these storms coming through.
Yeah. No, it is a good point. And it definitely can change a year for you one way or the other very quickly, can it?
On the contracting and supply side of things. So,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
and
Yeah.
and for the most part on the contracting side of things, Pete, I am putting that back on. I've got a couple reps that work for me, and they're great. They do great with the customers, and I'm all but stepping back from that business to make sure we can soar on the material handling side of things. Um, Unlike the contracting side of things, on the contracting side of things, you don't have to have a whole lot. If you sub everything out, your overhead can be pretty darn small. But on the material handling side of things, distribution side of things, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
well over $1 million out of my own hard-earned money here in just the last couple months. So
I
it's
can
do
believe
or
it.
die time for me right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I can believe that for sure. Well, Jason, it's been great to chat with you. It sounds like you got a lot going on and a big year ahead. So definitely looking forward to keeping an eye on everything that you got going on. And if you guys are in Central Ohio listening, definitely check out, Jason and his new roofing supply company. And, I really appreciate you being on and your support of Roofr, and glad to have you as the Roofer of the month for April.
Thank you, Pete. I appreciate it. And just want to give a shout out to Richie and the rest of the guys over there. You guys have done a tremendous job building something. I know they say, roofers built by roofer, and it's just amazing. I don't really think there's any other tech companies out there that can say they're as fast to market as you guys and as fast to make changes based on the professionals that you have subscribed to your services. So hats off to you guys as well. You guys are all doing a great job. Everybody in this whole process of Roofer of the Month that I've spoken to has been nothing but gracious and respectful and very kind and caring people. And I just can't say enough good things about you and your whole staff, Pete.
Really appreciate that. It's a great team. It's the best team that I've worked with, and I'm happy to be a part of it. And it's great to hear that, when you guys have interactions with the team, especially the behind the scenes team, so many of us see, me and Nick and Radford and those guys out there at shows, but there's a great supporting staff kind of working behind the scenes that are just doing an absolutely incredible job to to make Roofr what it is. And so I'm glad you got exposed to some of those people and got the chance to talk to them, because it's a great group.
So I'm going to leave it with one thing, Pete. So
Uh,
back in 2008, I did some commercials when Hurricane Ike came through, and everybody laughed. So there's a local car dealership here that has some slogans, and I ripped it a little bit, but I'll leave you with my slogan that I've had for my business for a lot of years. And it's not fake it till you make it. That might be there, but I'll leave everybody with this. Don't call the biggest, call the best.
There you go. I love it. Yeah. And that's a great quote. I think that's, I wish more guys would take that approach, right? It's not necessarily about being the biggest to be successful. And you've obviously proven that you can make that model work. So like I said, I really appreciate you jumping on, Jason, and great to hear from you. Great to get a little insight into your story. So look forward to big things for you in 2024. And thank you guys for joining us on the Roofr Report podcast.
Thank you, Pete.
Hey, everybody, thank you for listening. Check us out next time on the Roofr podcast. But until then, be sure to like us, subscribe to us, and check out all our other episodes on YouTube and Spotify.